Hello, my name is Sandra Clark and I am with Applied Ecosystems, and we are an environmental consulting company, and our specialty is due diligence associated with commercial property transactions. Thank you for joining my class. I will be giving you an environmental update on behalf of the Commercial Board of Realtors. Our class will take approximately 50 minutes, so I hope you stick with me to the very end. We are going to be covering a variety of topics. We're going to be talking about how the pandemic has affected the due diligence process. We'll be discussing the Michigan Underground Storage Tank Authority and how that is an important tool for you to use. It can save many a transaction that might be falling through due to a problem with an underground tank. We will discuss briefly PFAS and what's up with that, and what you might expect to see coming down the pipes from a regulatory standpoint on that. And last but not least, I'll give you kind of a personal account about the Wixom Lake situation and the Edenville Dam that failed earlier this year. As a child, I spent a lot of my summers on Wixom Lake, and my sister lives up there now, so I thought it might be fun to share some photos with you about that. So before we get started, I have to acknowledge it's more fun to talk to you guys in person. It makes for a better, more interactive class, but since we can't do that, please take a moment, write this stuff down. This is my contact information. As I'm going through this material, if you have any questions or any feedback at all that you would like to give me, please send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, give me a call. My cell phone's on there. You can call me anytime on that. But that way we can communicate. And of course, I'd love to work with you and help you with any of your projects that you might have. So with that, let's dive in and talk about the topic that everyone is talking about. Of course, coronavirus and the pandemic has just changed everything. As I am sitting here doing a Zoom Con Ed class, it is just an example of all the changes that we're going through. And I want to discuss with you how the pandemic has impacted our industry in commercial real estate. But I feel like first I should probably acknowledge how serious of an issue this is. According to many sources, as of September 11th, there are close to 200,000 people who would still be with us today if it weren't for this virus. And there's a close family friend of ours that that we lost. And I hope that you guys are all staying safe, and I hope that you haven't lost anyone or are dealing with anyone suffering from this virus. But I thought this picture of the big house with 100,000 people, and recognizing that they're talking in this country 200,000 people having been lost to date, that we should acknowledge that first before I jump into talking about how it's impacting our industry in commercial real estate. So with that, please stay safe, protect yourself, and let's get through this. COVID-19 and the impact on commercial real estate. I'm sure most of you know better than I how this has impacted the economy. It's certainly impacted my business, my team, and how we do operations. Most of us are working remotely. We're just starting to get back to the office on a more regular basis, but it's just kind of changed the way things work, certainly with the lockdown and just the change of everyday business operations. But that said, many people are seeing the opportunity that exists now. Certainly real estate, I don't know if I can move this over. Real estate is a great investment for stockpiled capital. People are not spending money on many things that they would typically spend money on. And real estate is, as you know, something that's considered a very stable investment. So we're seeing people recognize that and use this time to look for investment opportunities. For a while, lenders were bogged down with the payroll protection program. It was very difficult to get communications, to get loans regarding that, let alone regarding real estate transactions. A whole bunch of real estate deals ground to a halt during that time. But we are now getting over that, and lenders are showing an interest in taking on these types of loans, and so that's a very good thing. Buyers are recognizing that there's some excellent deals out there, and I'm sure that you guys are taking advantage of that as well with your clients. And so distressed properties are very much in demand. And of course, low interest rates are always popular for real estate transactions. So there is a silver lining that is causing quite a bit of activity in the commercial real estate world. And hopefully you guys are feeling the benefit of that. So environmental due diligence and the process associated with that. Now, you probably know this. For those of you who have been to CBOR classes before, and maybe you've heard me speak, I have talked about this pretty regularly, and you're probably pretty familiar with this general process. But just for the fun of it, because it's my favorite topic, I'm going to run through it real quick. Please know that if you're new to this, or if you have people on your team who are new to it, and you want additional information or would like a deep dive into any of these topics, I am happy to come to your office, do a presentation, or do it by Zoom and go over this process. I have somewhere a flow chart that I will send to you if you send me an email. I've given this out before, but that's usually pretty helpful for, if not you, your clients, if they want to understand, why is the lender requiring that we go through this? Why do I have to spend the money for this, and how does it protect me? I consider that part of my job to help you sell the need for this service, because it really is an essential component to the transaction. So we do a phase one. Why? In order to identify whether there is a potential liability for a purchaser, a new owner of a property. The phase one has three primary components to it. The site inspection, the regulatory review, and the historical research associated with the property. Now, with the site inspection, kind of common sense, we're looking for how any hazardous or petroleum chemicals may have been used on the property, historically, currently. We look for drainage systems, explosion-proof fittings, of course, any chemicals that are stored on site, foundations, evidence of old pump islands, fill material, all that stuff. Please make sure things are in order before the consultant comes out to the site for the site inspection. So I'm going to say about that. The historical records are about 10 different historical records that we look at in order to determine the full story of the property. How has this site been used from the time that it was originally developed from virgin land? Aerial photographs, address directories, Sanborn fire insurance maps. There's a variety of things we look at, including interviews with people affiliated with the property. And then the regulatory records. We look at local, state, and federal records to see if the site is listed as having any environmental concerns associated with it. Health department, fire department, building department, tax assessor's office, all local records. Regulatory records are usually a little more site specific if the property is listed on that standard environmental database that we get to see if the property is listed as having any known spills or underground tanks or that sort of thing. So depending on the results of the phase one, we may or may not recommend additional work. And that's a function of whether we identified any recognized environmental conditions, or RECs, RECs, on the property. If a phase one is completed and no RECs are found, then you're good to go. You have satisfied all appropriate inquiry, your due diligence is complete, and no further work is needed. And even if there's something on that property that wasn't discoverable through the process of a phase one, you're still protected from liability because you did what the industry standard says you need to do in order to investigate it. So phase ones are really important. If a REC is identified, If it's an off-site wreck, a person is not liable, a property owner is not liable for contamination. I talk a lot with my hands. For contamination that migrates to your property. So frequently we might cite a gas station or industrial site or landfill down the road, but we do not recommend any additional work. Now there are some cases where there still might be a reason to do some sampling on the property to see if that off-site concern has actually impacted your site. But generally speaking, if the wreck is off-site, no further work is done. If the wreck is on-site, then it's likely that additional work will be needed. Hopefully, there's some historical records that we can get where somebody else has already paid to have that work done, and we can take advantage of that and save you some money or your client some money. So if there's no historical records, then we might recommend a phase 2 subsurface investigation, which is where we investigate the wreck that was identified in the phase 1. Once we do that and we get analytical results back, we compare those results to the state criteria. And if the site is considered to be contaminated, then it's called a facility. If the site is a facility, then it is eligible for a baseline environmental assessment. A baseline environmental assessment is a report that's sent to the state of Michigan, and you have to have an up-to-date phase 1 with it. And it's sent to the state of Michigan saying, hey, here is the property I'm buying. Here's the contamination that pre-exists my ownership and operation of this property. Do not hold me, the new owner of this property, liable for the cleanup of pre-existing contamination that I did not cause. A baseline environmental assessment must be completed within 45 days of ownership or occupancy, whichever comes first. So the timing of that report is really critical. Due care compliance. That is the component where we look at the contamination that we found on site and we determine whether it's causing a health exposure risk to the occupants of the property. So we look at the various exposure pathways. Drinking water, direct contact, inhalation. There's a list of them, and we compare the level of contamination for the particular constituent of concern with the various exposure pathways that might apply to that property. And we put together a report saying why that contamination is not going to make the people sick who are at the property, the workers or the public that might come to that business. If there is an exposure pathway, for example, if there's contaminated groundwater and the site is using a drinking water well, we may recommend that they connect to a municipal water supply or put in a filter to clean up the drinking water that they're getting from their well, or some other mitigation to eliminate that due care exposure, that health exposure risk. That is, in general, is the due diligence process that a purchaser needs to go through to be protected from pre-existing contamination. So what's changed now that we're dealing with a pandemic? So a lot of this is kind of common sense, and you're dealing with it, I'm sure, with what you do with your businesses. But site inspections, there's a level of complexity now that we didn't have to deal with before. One, especially when this first started, we had to make sure we had the proper essential employees prepared to go to properties. There were travel restrictions on where we could go. Personal protection equipment, obviously masks are needed, and in some cases gloves, depending on what we're doing. In my industry, we're very used to PPE, so that's nothing new. Locked and inaccessible buildings, this seems to be a bigger issue than ever before because people aren't working at their offices. So coordinating that with your building managers and the occupants of the site is a little more challenging. And then closed businesses, that's another issue where we're used to being able to go out to a property and talk to the operators, find out how they manage their chemicals, understand how their equipment works and how they maintain that equipment. Where right now, these places are largely closed down or vacant. So that's adding another level of challenge for us. If we run into one of these problems during a site inspection, it is up to the environmental professional or the EP to determine whether that limitation is actually a problem. Is it impacting the conclusion of the report or not. If it is, then we have to state in the report that it's a significant limitation, and that means something else is going to have to be done. We're going to have to wait. We're going to have to overcome that. If it's not, we can simply state that it is not a significant limitation, and we can complete the report without seeing portions of the building. And that's, again, another common sense kind of thing. When we go to, say, a large apartment complex, we don't have to inspect every individual apartment if they're constructed in a similar fashion, what have you. We can make those types of judgments. So the pandemic has impacted our ability to get some of the regulatory and historical records that we need to complete a proper phase 1 environmental assessment. This is probably the biggest deal, in that we send Freedom of Information Act requests to the state of Michigan or to the local government offices in order to get those records back. And frequently we're not getting a response. And for a while there, we didn't know how long it was going to take. Again, we're starting to see more of a response from these offices, but that varies municipality to municipality. So we also used to be able to make an appointment with the state and go to the state office, to EGLE, formerly the DEQ, but now the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Yes, I cheated and looked over at my notepad for that because I'm still getting used to the new name, but anyway, getting records is a problem. Same is true with some of the historical resources that we need. Having historical reports is extremely important for the conclusion of a phase 1 assessment. If you receive a phase 1 from another consultant, not sure why you ever would, but if you did, and that consultant says, hey, we submitted a FOIA request, we didn't get the records in time, but when they come in, we'll send you an addendum letter and we'll let you know if there's anything you need to worry about. Well, that doesn't work, because if it comes back and there is a concern, the transaction may be finished and there's nothing you can do about it. And further, it doesn't meet the standard for a phase 1. The consultant has to come to a conclusion whether there's a significant data gap or not by virtue of not having those records. So make sure the consultant is coming to that conclusion. And of course, you can call me and I can help you with that. So what happens if we don't get these records? This was recognized at the regulatory level as being a problem, because people were still trying to close transactions, and they were buying and selling properties that had environmental problems. But yet, to finish the due diligence process within that 45 days, remember, a baseline assessment must be finished within 45 days of ownership or occupancy. So there were some delays, and some people were not able to meet that deadline, but it wasn't their fault. It was because of the pandemic. So on March 26th of 2020, Governor Whitmer acknowledged this problem by allowing a mechanism, by allowing people to include with their baseline assessment a letter describing why the delay happened and explaining why it was inconsequential to the outcome of the baseline assessment report. And this is allowed for any property that is purchased, occupied, or foreclosed on or after February 1st, 2020. So the submitter would provide this letter, and it would be like a cover page to the baseline assessment. And if it exceeded that 45th day, then you were okay, assuming you had a justifiable reason. As of July 9th, 2020, EGLE came up with a checklist. I don't know if I have a picture of that, but it looks like this, a checklist that a submitter can attach. I believe that that's in lieu of that cover letter, where you explain whether the delay, what the problem was, whether it was associated with getting the phase 2 done. Sometimes it's difficult to get a contractor out now. Everything is taking more time. Working with the labs, finding drillers, The rest of that can take more time if you don't have your own team that can handle that sort of thing, which we do. But anyway, so this form allows the submitter of a baseline to explain what is the reason for the delay, and the state then can determine whether they agree that it is inconsequential to the outcome of the baseline, and therefore they won't hold you responsible for turning in your baseline a little late. So those mechanisms exist for you today if you need them. If you're running late on your baseline, don't panic. We can help you get through that. How is the pandemic affecting due care compliance? Well, due care is, again, how you're using the property in a way so that people are not exposed to the contamination. So pretty much the same protocols apply. I would caution people to make sure that if their buildings are not occupied, that their systems are still working. I think that this is kind of standard protocol, especially for like property managers and managers of property managers, to make sure that you know, the building is not getting too cold in the winter, or that if, for example, you're running a vapor mitigation system, that that is still operating and not being turned off even if fewer people are in the building or whatnot. But if your due care or documentation of due care compliance requires that you do regular inspections to make sure that people are not, say, doing subsurface work on the property or what have you, you want to make sure that you're continuing on with those protocols despite the pandemic. So again, landlords, tenants, you want to make sure you're doing your standard due diligence. If you've got a tenant moving into a building that may be using hazardous or petroleum chemicals of any sort, make sure that you are documenting the condition of the property before they move in and when they move out. Protect your landlords. If you have any questions about that, we have some specific services that we can offer to help with that. But make sure you're protecting them. Again, closed buildings, how are hazardous chemicals being managed or stored? Did they leave chemicals on the outside of a building and then vacate it for 3 months? Kind of, again, obvious things. Disinfecting buildings. A lot of people, as they're bringing people back to work or wanting their landlords or new tenants to feel comfortable that it's safe to move into a building, they're having companies come out and disinfect a building. That's another service we provide. Make sure, I have a prop, make sure that you're very careful about what products that company is using. There's only so many products that the EPA has come out and said that that it has an effect on viruses. So you want to make sure they're using the proper application process and the proper product. So make sure you're using the right stuff if you decide to do that. So something to think about. And again, if you're operating like a vapor mitigation system, make sure you keep that going. So overall, that's pretty much it in terms of how is the due diligence process affecting or excuse me, how is the pandemic affecting the due diligence process? Moving on, next topic. MUSTA, the Michigan Underground Storage Tank Authority, MUSTA. Now, MUSTA is a program that's been around for a little while now, but it's underutilized, and the state wants to use these funds to help owners or people who are responsible for underground storage tanks to clean them up if they have leaked. And MUSTA has been an excellent tool that we have used to help our clients overcome a potential significant problem associated with an underground tank as it relates to cleanup and a property sale. So here are the nuts and bolts of MUSTA. So the funds are available to owners and operators and local units of government. It applies only to petroleum underground storage tanks, so not heating oil. So be really careful if you're going to remove a tank to make sure that it is properly registered as the type of tank that it is. You don't want to label a diesel tank a heating oil tank, because now it's not going to be eligible for MUSTA reimbursement, and that's not cool. There is a $2,000 deductible. Now that MUSTA is not a program where people who are responsible for more than 7 underground storage tanks, they cannot take advantage of this. But generally speaking, for the random tank that we find or the few tanks on a property, MUSTA is an excellent opportunity so that you can take away the fear of, well, what happens if we pull the tank and a release is found? So there is only a $2,000 deductible after the tank has been removed. MUSTA does not pay for the removal of underground tanks. There is no cost to sign up. So before you remove a tank from the ground, before you do it, sign up for MUSTA. You don't have to pay the $2,000 yet, but sign up for MUSTA, pull the tank from the ground, and then if there is a release and a problem, such that remediation or perhaps a due care response activity like dealing with vapor intrusion or something like that, if that is needed, and that stuff can be a deal killer, as you know, MUSTA can step in and pay for it all. So this really takes away a big part of the fear of tanks on properties. So MUSTA will contribute up to $1 million for remediation and due care compliance associated with the release, and it can be transferred to a new buyer. So you got a situation, an unexpected tank is found, an owner can sign up for MUSTA, pull the tank, and everything else can be transferred to the new owner of the property, which is pretty cool. So let's talk about a case study. So we had a situation where a property owner purchased a property in 1997 and they did not do any due diligence. It happens. They didn't do any due diligence, and then they decided to sell the property in 2018. And at that time, a phase 1 assessment was done. And after you've owned a property, or after you've owned it, certainly for greater than 45 days, that is not a time when you want to be finding problems on your property. But phase 1 was done, and underground tanks were found on the property, or a concern with underground tanks were found on the property. This illustration here, this isn't the exact site, just so you know, but you can see over there to the right in the red circle, it indicates that there was a filling station. The little circles are gas tanks. This is a part of a Sanborn fire insurance map. This is an excellent historical resource that we use with phase 1. It's really cool. It tells us a lot about how properties were used many, many years ago. They date back to the late 1800s. Sanborn was a fire insurance company that kept track of properties that could have fire hazards or potential explosion hazards. So they're really cool maps for nerds like me who like maps. Anyway, so a gas station was indicated on the property. Again, not the actual site. We want to protect the innocent here. But so the previous owner, and this, not the current owner who's selling the property, but as part of the phase 1, we interviewed the previous owner of the property to see if we could find out, hey, what do you know about this historical gas station? He said, yes, he remembered that there were 2 pumps out in front of the building, and he recalled removing those pumps, and he thought he had removed the tanks, but wasn't sure. Now, that can happen, but I can tell you that removing underground tanks, especially when they're sizable, and back in the day, underground tanks, you know, were much smaller in capacity, but now some of these tanks that are 4,000, 8,000, 10,000 gallons, they're huge, and you remember when they get removed. But anyway, he didn't remember whether the tanks were out of the ground or not. Well, needless to say, the buyer got really nervous. The seller, who didn't do any due diligence back when he bought the property in 97, was very nervous, partly because the people down the road from the property were using drinking water wells. So there was a great concern that if there was a release from this tank system, that it could be impacting the people in the area. So he was very concerned about that. So ground penetrating radar was recommended. The photo on the left, or is it you? I guess left, right is gonna, anyway, the photo on the left there is what ground penetrating radar system commonly looks like. And what we do is we drag that over the surface of the ground slowly, and it gives us a picture of what the subsurface conditions are like, we end up with kind of a graph like you're seeing to the right. That's telling me I better pick up my pace, and you end up with just a curve, which typically indicates that there's a tank. So tanks were found on the property, but the seller was very concerned about being held responsible, so he wanted to back out of the deal. So what we did is we got the seller to sign up for MUSTA, and he paid to remove the tanks. A gasoline release was discovered on the property, so the seller paid the $2,000 deductible, and that was it. He sold the property for $300,000 and transferred the MUSTA claim to the new buyer. And there's been approximately $150,000 in corrective action, including the installation of a vapor mitigation system to support the new owner's due care compliance, which is often a problem right now because, as many of you know from Con Ed from last year, vapor intrusion is a big deal. So MUSTA paid for the installation of that system, and now we're in the final stages of getting closure for that release, so the property is able to maintain its value. So MUSTA's awesome. That is the moral of that story. And that's all you need to know about that. So moving on, well, I'll tell you another case study. So we had a situation just recently where an attorney contacted us, and he had a client who purchased a commercial plaza, like a smaller 3-unit commercial plaza, about 15 years ago. Now, both the attorney and his client were very familiar with this property, and they knew never anything, never a gas station. It was always a convenience store, and they knew how the property has been used since they were children. So for the last 50, 60 years, they were extremely confident, so elected not to do a phase 1, not to do any due diligence. And you can see by the picture what I think of that. So the client owns this property. He's not selling it, but he decides that he needs to transfer the ownership of this property into a new LLC for some personal business reason. So he does that in March of 2020, he transfers this property. In August of 2020, the client, he receives a letter from Eagle, from the state, stating that they have multiple lines of evidence that the site previously operated as a gas station. Now, this is unusual. We don't see this a lot. What caused the state to send that letter to the client? There was a change of ownership. The individual who owns the same LLC changed ownership. Now, keep in mind, it's very important when you're changing ownership, even if it's within properties that you own yourself, that you do due diligence and you protect whatever individual or entity is going to own that real property. So the state sent this letter. I redacted the names, but notice the date, August 27th. And in this letter, it says, Eagle has multiple lines of evidence that suggests the subject property is the location of a former gas station. And it says, though through your purchase of the property, the potential failure to conduct appropriate inquiry, you may be liable for the contamination identified at this site. So we're past 45 days. So what are we going to recommend to this guy? One, we're going to find out whether the site actually was a gas station or not. Sure enough, Lara, the licensing and regulatory affairs records, confirmed it was a gas station. We recommended ground penetrating radar on the property, and we are recommending that the owner of the property sign up for MUSTA if underground tanks are found on the site. So, few lessons to learn there, and they are: always do your due diligence when changing ownership. Do not assume that you know the history of a property. MUSTA can be used even by liable parties. So even if you didn't do your due diligence, MUSTA is there for you. And MUSTA claims can be transferred to new owners. And it can pay for a buyer's due care response activities. Okay. All right, PFAS. And I confess, I have a hard time pronouncing this, but sound it out with me. Polyfluoral, yeah, I don't know, substances. Somebody call me up and set me straight on that. But anyway, they're ubiquitous. They can be found anywhere. 99% of all Americans already have a degree of PFAS in their bloodstream. The state, the nation is in the process right now of figuring out what are we going to do about this stuff? How bad is it? How can we regulate it? Because it's in everything. It's no longer manufactured in the United States, but it's coming in consumers' goods from all over the world. On August 3rd, the state of Michigan promulgated rules implementing drinking water cleanup for PFAS. This is very new, August of this year. So PFAS can be found in all sorts of things. The things I have listed here, kind of hard to read, but anyway, these are the biggest culprits for PFAS content. As you can see, it's a huge spectrum of things. Again, call me, I'll send you this presentation. I can give you a list of all this stuff after the class. So what's the impact on real estate for PFAS? From an environmental due diligence standpoint, it's possible that doing a facility determination and investigating properties that are associated with any of those site uses that were listed before, that could increase the price for that. Doesn't mean you have to test for it all the time, especially if you have other constituents of concern. Remember, let's be smart about how we investigate properties and not test for and investigate more than what we have to. So let's be really careful about that. But extra attention and extra care has to be given to any property where there's drinking water wells involved. Stay tuned on PFAS. That's going to become a bigger deal in the future. So moving on, let's talk about Wixom Lake and the Edenville Dam. And again, this is kind of a personal story for me. I and my family has had a cottage on this lake for as long as I've known, and even my dad grew up in this area as well. So there's a small lagoon that you can see over to the left of this picture, and that's M30 that you can see there. My sister's house is right in that lagoon. And as many of you know, the dam failed, and that's caused just catastrophic problems up in that area. But a little history on the Edenville Dam. It's a 96-year-old dam. It's owned by Boyce Hydro LLC. They had been cited for several violations. It was kind of well known in the area that they were not cooperating with the state and that there were potential problems with that dam. Since 2018, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission revoked their energy license, so it hasn't been used for energy production since that time. On May 19th, 2020, I'll never forget it, I got an alert on my phone, as many of you did, that said that the Eden and Sanford dams in Midland were in imminent danger of failing. So of course I contacted my sister right away to let her know what was going on. Several things have happened since then, but it's interesting to note that Boyce Hydro filed for a bankruptcy in the end of July, and despite many requests from the state of Michigan to ask them to evaluate and step up to the situation, they are not cooperating. So what I have now are just a series of pictures that were taken from a variety of sources, most of them from either my sister or myself, just by going up and being in the area at the time that this happened. And I'll tell you a little bit about it as we go. This was the alert that I got on my phone May 19th. And again, if you've got a history with Wixom Lake, and that's near and dear to your heart, this was just shocking to us all to know that this was happening. So what caused the problem? There were historic rains and winds, so that we were dealing with very high levels of water that were entering the lake. Now, Wixom Lake is the Tobacco and the Tittabawassee River dammed in order to form a lake. So it's a man-made lake by damming those two rivers. So just a huge rain caused this influx of water, and it ended up saturating the eastern earthen dike of the Edenville Dam. So prior to the dam breaking, though, the water was rising like it had never been before. The picture on the right is actually the lower level of my sister's house. She had about 2, almost 3 feet of water that you could see from the glass door inside the house. They were putting sandbags inside the house to try to keep the water from breaking the door and flooding the house. It's hard to tell by the picture on the left, but that water is right up to the edge of people's properties. And so it was crazy, the water that was coming in to the lake at that time. When the dam finally broke, approximately 900 feet of the berm, the earthen berm, the soil berm that's adjacent to the concrete dam structure is what washed out. And this is an aerial view, and the source of this photo is over there to the left, but you can see on the top of the photo is Wixom Lake, and this is the water just flooding down towards Sanford from the broken dam. Here's a picture of the berm, the soil, the sand berm that got washed out, and you can see the concrete structure on the other side. The lagoon where my sister's house sits, and obviously previously had water, this is what it looked like shortly after the dam failed. And it took less than 3 hours to go from having almost 3 feet of water at her living room door that she was trying to keep out of her house to having a completely empty lagoon and pretty much empty lake. Crazy. There's, I don't know if this one shows it, no. We're kind of standing on top of what is a large a pipe that dumps water in from a lagoon on the other side of M30. Here is that pipe, and kind of sad because after the water drained out, there were many fish that were just laying on the lake bed, alive, still flopping around. And my sister, being an animal lover like me, she called me up. She's like, Sandra, you got to get up here and save these fish. There were birds that were flying down and having a great dinner, getting the fish. Some of these were very large carp. Here, I'll show you. Just laying on the water, unable to swim. So my sister and family collected as many of these fish coming out of this, and there was still like a little river that led to an area where the water was still flowing out where the dam broke, and we took the fish there and were able to let them go so they could at least swim down there. What happened to them after that, I don't know. We found a goose that got stuck because it was like quicksand. It was very hard to walk in. You'd sink down very quickly, and it was you had to be very careful. We quickly learned that it was not safe to be on the lake bed during that time, but we managed to save a goose that was stuck, and we named him Wixom, took him to a rescue center, and he's doing well today. So other pictures. This is after the dam broke, and this is a picture of the lagoon there on the left, the general lake area. It's been a problem with people immediately after this happened. There were a lot of sightseers. People were bringing their four-wheelers and they wanted to play on the lake bed, causing significant erosion. A lot of these seawalls, what have you, were being damaged, and it was very dangerous for people, so they came out and told people not to play on the lake bed. Now, as time has passed, it's starting to get overgrown. You can see how these docks were previously out in the water, and this is what Wixom Lake looks like today. That red circle there, that shows the pipe that I was showing you before. It's all overgrown now. In fact, down lower into the lagoon area, there are trees that are almost as tall as I am. Not that I'm that tall, but there's considerable overgrowth. And it's kind of amazing the way nature takes over so quickly. In fact, now there is some concern about what's going to happen, because they're saying that it might be up to 5 years before they repair the dams and restore Wixom Lake, and there's going to be an entirely new ecosystem on the lake by that time. So this is the concrete structure of what's left of the dam. Again, what failed was the earthen portion to the right of what you're seeing there, and you can see what the lake bed looks like. So what are they going to do? They don't know is the quick answer to that. There have been all sorts of suggestions. They're talking about heavily taxing the residents along the lake to help fund repair of the dam, and taking over ownership from Boyce Hydro. They're talking about possibly opening up a portion of the other portion of Wixom Lake and filling that portion, but the side of the lake where the Edenville Dam is, that would remain unfilled until such time as the dam gets repaired. They're floating all sorts of ideas about what to do, but needless to say, this has had significant impact on the ecosystem and the people who live there. So stay tuned on that when I get more information, or if any of you have a particular interest about what's going on Wixom Lake. I have a lot more information. I didn't want to just tell you a bunch of information that's already out there, but I thought you might enjoy those pictures. So that ends it for the content of this class. Well done. You made it through. I appreciate you sticking through with me. Please write down this information again if you want any expanded information on what I talked about. If you have any questions, or if there are any projects or sites that you'd like to discuss, please give me a call anytime, and I look forward to talking with you and seeing you again in person in the not too distant future. Thank you.